The afternoon sun filtered through ancient oaks, casting shadows that moved like living things across the King's Road. Elara Blackthorn rode in silence, her eyes scanning the forest edge with the practiced awareness of someone who had learned early that survival depended on seeing danger before it saw you. 22 years of life had taught her many lessons, but the most important came from her father. In this world, you were either predator or prey, and the difference was often measured in heartbeats. She wore the leather armor of a mercenary guard, deliberately plain, deliberately unremarkable. The other escorts assigned to the merchant caravan had given her curious looks when she joined them that morning. A woman, traveling alone, seeking work as a hired sword. Some had smirked. Others had simply accepted the extra blade without question. None of them knew who her father had been. That was exactly how she wanted it. The caravan consisted of 3 wagons loaded with spices from the Eastern Territories, valuable enough to need protection, but not valuable enough to attract serious attention. Or so the merchant had assured them. Elara had taken the job because the coin was fair and the route passed near Nightshade territory, where she'd heard Lord Kale was hiring experienced soldiers for border patrol. 3 years since her father's death, 3 years of scraping together work wherever she could find it. 3 years of proving that Marcus Blackthorn's daughter had inherited more than just his name. The attack came without warning, which told her everything she needed to know about their enemy. Professional, coordinated, experienced, 12 men emerged from the forest on both sides of the road, moving with the synchronized precision of soldiers rather than common bandits. Elara's hand went to her sword, even as her mind catalogued the tactical situation. 3 bowmen on the left flank, positioned in elevated terrain behind dense brush. Perfect firing positions. The main assault force of 6 came from the right, shields overlapping as they advanced in a wedge formation designed to split the caravan's defense. Another 3 moved to cut off retreat, blocking the road behind them. Classic elimination tactic. Her father had taught her to recognize the pattern. Push the targets toward terrain that limits their options, then overwhelm them with coordinated strikes from multiple directions. These men had done this before, many times, and the bodies left behind had never lived to describe the method. The merchant guards responded with the panicked inefficiency of men who had never faced real combat. 2 broke and ran immediately. The others fumbled for weapons, shouting contradictory orders, each man fighting his own separate battle instead of working as a unit. Elara's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. "Titan formation! Shields overlapping! Archers, suppress that tree line now!" The command carried the weight of someone who expected to be obeyed. 3 of the guards responded instinctively, muscle memory overriding panic. They'd been soldiers once, before whatever circumstances had reduced them to caravan work. Their shields came together with a solid clunk of wood on wood, creating a defensive wall. The 2 guards with crossbows turned toward the brush line and loosed bolts that might not hit anything, but would force the hidden archers to keep their heads down. It bought them seconds. Sometimes seconds were enough. Elara moved toward the main assault force, her sword already drawn, her body settling into the fighting stance her father had drilled into her through 10,000 repetitions. The lead attacker saw her coming and adjusted his approach, raising his shield to block what he assumed would be a desperate overhead strike. Instead, she dropped low at the last instant, her blade sweeping horizontally at knee level. The edge bit deep into the gap between the man's greaves and boots. He went down screaming. The soldier behind him thrust forward with his spear, a good strike that should have taken her in the chest. Should have. But Elara had already read the movement in his shoulders, the slight tensing that preceded the thrust by half a heartbeat. She twisted sideways, feeling the spear point tear through her leather jerkin without touching skin, and brought her pommel down hard on the exposed back of his neck. He dropped without a sound. 2 down in as many breaths. The remaining attackers hesitated, reassessing. That hesitation told her they were disciplined, but not suicidal. Good soldiers would adapt to unexpected resistance rather than throw themselves uselessly at a superior fighter. But their mission wasn't the caravan. She realized it the moment 4 of the attackers broke away from the main assault and sprinted toward the ornate traveling coach at the rear of the formation. They moved with the focused intensity of men who had a specific target, a specific objective that mattered more than the spices or the coin or even their own comrades' survival. The coach's passenger. Elara's tactical mind assembled the pieces even as her body was already moving. The attack pattern made sense now. The frontal assault was a diversion, designed to pull defenders away from the real target. The elevated archers were meant to suppress anyone who tried to interfere with the extraction team. This wasn't robbery. This was kidnapping or assassination, executed with military precision. Which meant the person in that coach was important. Important enough to plan this operation. Important enough to risk 12 trained soldiers on a public road in broad daylight. The caravan guards couldn't stop them. They were barely holding the line against the remaining attackers. If Elara stayed with the main formation, the mission would succeed. 4 soldiers against 1 elderly woman in a coach. No contest. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, as clear as if he stood beside her. A mercenary chooses who she serves. Choose with honor, or don't choose at all. The choice took less than a heartbeat. Elara broke from the defensive line and sprinted toward the coach, her legs pumping, closing the distance with the desperate speed of someone who knew she had seconds to prevent whatever was about to happen. The 4 attackers reached the coach just ahead of her and yanked the door open with enough force to tear it from its hinges. Inside, an elderly woman in silk robes sat with her back straight and her hands steady, gripping a walking stick that looked far too sturdy to be merely decorative. Her silver hair was bound in an elaborate style that spoke of nobility, and her eyes held no fear, only cold calculation. The first attacker lunged forward, reaching to grab her arm. The walking stick moved faster than seemed possible for someone her age, the concealed blade inside flashing in the sunlight as it swept across his face. Blood sprayed. The man stumbled backward, hands clutching his ruined eye. But 3 more remained, and they adjusted instantly, spreading out to attack from multiple angles. The woman was skilled, far more skilled than any elderly noble had a right to be, but she was still one person against 3 trained soldiers. They would wear her down, overwhelm her through sheer numbers and youth, unless the numbers changed. Elara hit the nearest attacker from behind with her full body weight, driving him into the coach's frame hard enough that she heard ribs crack. He went down gasping. The other 2 turned toward her, recognizing the real threat now, and for an instant she saw their faces clearly. Not random hired swords. These men had the bearing of professional soldiers, the kind who served noble houses for steady pay and regular meals. Which house? Shadowfang, most likely. Lord Ragnar had been making aggressive moves into Nightshade territory for months. Everyone in the mercenary community knew it. Most had chosen not to get involved, recognizing that wars between werewolf nobles tended to consume anyone foolish enough to stand in their path. The 2 soldiers attacked in concert, their coordination speaking to hours of training together. High strike and low strike, forcing her to defend against both simultaneously or take a wound that would slow her enough for the killing blow. Good tactics. Her father would have approved. She parried the high strike with her blade, feeling the impact shiver up her arm, and used the momentum to spin inside the arc of the low attack. Her elbow caught the second soldier in the throat with precise force. He staggered backward, choking. The first soldier recovered quickly and thrust again, but Elara had already moved, circling to put the coach between them, buying herself space and time to control the engagement. The elderly woman used that moment to strike, her concealed blade flashing out to open a deep gash in the choking soldier's sword arm. He dropped his weapon with a cry. 2 disabled, 1 still dangerous. The remaining attacker backed away slowly, his eyes moving between Elara and the woman, calculating odds that had shifted dramatically in the last 30 seconds. Through the trees, Elara could hear the sounds of the main fight ending. The merchant guards had either won or died. Either way, this soldier was outnumbered and alone. He turned and ran. The other attackers were already retreating, moving back into the forest with the practiced efficiency of soldiers executing a withdrawal under fire. They carried their wounded, left no one behind, maintained formation even in defeat. Definitely professional military, not bandits. Elara's breath came hard and fast, adrenaline still singing in her veins. She turned to the elderly woman who had lowered her walking stick and was studying Elara with an intensity that felt like being examined under a magnifying glass. "You have my thanks, child. That could have gone quite differently without your intervention." The voice was cultured, educated, carrying the subtle accent of northern nobility. Elara noted the expensive silk of the woman's robes, the quality of the jewelry at her throat, the deliberate way she held herself despite the violence of the last few minutes. This was someone accustomed to authority, to being obeyed without question. "Are you injured, my lady?" "Nothing time won't heal, but you. You fought like someone who has seen real battle, not caravan work." It wasn't a question, but Elara answered anyway. Lying to someone who had just watched her fight would be pointless. "My father was a mercenary commander. I've been training since I could hold a blade." "Marcus Blackthorn." The name hung in the air between them like smoke. Elara's hand tightened on her sword hilt. Very few people knew her father's real name. Most had known him only by his reputation, the commander who never lost a battle, who could read terrain and enemy movement like a scholar reading text. "You knew him." "I knew of him. His tactics at Greymore Ridge are still studied in military academies. The Venus trap, they called it. Allowed the enemy to think they'd won until it was too late to escape." Something cold moved through Elara's chest. Her father had never spoken much about Greymore Ridge, though she knew it had been one of his greatest victories. Valdorian heavy cavalry, 40,000 strong, broken by 15,000 defenders who had used the terrain and the enemy's own momentum to destroy them. Before she could respond, the sound of hoofbeats filled the air. Many hoofbeats, coming fast from the direction of Nightshade territory. Through the trees, Elara could see mounted cavalry in black armor with silver trim, moving in perfect formation. 50 riders at least, possibly more, their discipline evident in the way they maintained spacing even at full gallop. The lead rider broke from the formation as they reached the road, dismounting with fluid grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. He was perhaps 30 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with amber eyes that swept across the scene with the assessing gaze of someone trained to evaluate tactical situations in seconds. His armor was finer than his soldiers, marked with the wolf's head sigil of House Nightshade. Lord Kael himself. Elara had never seen him in person, but his reputation preceded him. The Alpha of Nightshade territory, veteran of a dozen border conflicts, known for being as skilled with strategy as he was with a blade. He took in the disabled attackers, the damaged coach, the elderly woman standing unharmed, and finally, Elara herself, still holding her bloodied sword in a tactical stance. His gaze lingered on her for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable sensation of being catalogued, assessed, filed away in a mental ledger of potential threats and assets. "Mother, explain what transpired here." "Mother." The word dropped into place with sudden clarity. The elderly woman was Duchess Morgana Nightshade, the Alpha's mother, known throughout the Northern Territories as a political strategist whose machinations had shaped border policy for 3 decades. Which meant this attack hadn't been random. Someone had known she would be traveling this road, at this time, with minimal escort. Someone with access to House Nightshade's internal intelligence. "These gentlemen attempted to forcibly relocate me," Morgana said with dry humor. This young woman objected to their methods, quite strenuously. Kael's eyes returned to Elara. She met his gaze directly, refusing to look away or drop her eyes in deference. Mercenaries didn't bow to nobles unless they were being paid to bow. It was a matter of professional pride. "You gave commands to the other guards. Military training, not a question." Elara nodded once. "Mercenary, Commander Blackthorn's daughter." Something flickered in Kael's expression. Recognition. His voice, when he spoke again, carried a different quality. Not warmth exactly, but acknowledgement. "Marcus Blackthorn served in the northern campaigns. You're his girl." "I'm his soldier." The correction was automatic, instinctive. She'd spent 3 years fighting the assumption that being Marcus Blackthorn's daughter meant she was carried by his reputation rather than her own skill. The distinction mattered. Kael's mouth twitched in what might have been approval. He turned to his second-in-command, a scarred veteran whose weathered face had seen more battles than most soldiers survived. "Captain Finn, secure the wounded. I want at least one of them conscious enough to answer questions, and send scouts to track where they retreated. I want to know which route they used and where they plan to take my mother." Orders given, he turned back to Elara and Morgana. "Can you ride?" The question was directed at Elara. She resisted the urge to give a sarcastic answer. Nobles didn't appreciate sarcasm from hired swords, no matter how well-deserved. "Better than most of your men." This time Kael definitely smiled, though it disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared. "We'll see." The journey to Castle Nightshade took 3 hours at a pace that tested Elara's claim about her riding skill. Kael set a punishing rhythm, his cavalry moving in coordinated formation that shifted smoothly to accommodate terrain changes. Elara found herself riding near the front of the column, close enough to the Alpha that she could hear his quiet conversations with Captain Finn about patrol routes and supply lines. He was testing her. She realized it after the first hour. Every time the formation adjusted, he watched to see if she maintained her position correctly. When they passed through a narrow defile that would have been perfect for an ambush, his eyes tracked to see if she recognized the tactical danger. She did, and made a point of scanning the high ground on both sides, her hand resting casually on her sword hilt. "Your formation is too stretched," she said during a brief pause to rest the horses. The words came out before she could stop them, professional assessment overriding social caution. "Outriders should be 200 yards forward, not 100, and your rear guard is vulnerable to flanking through that forest break at 4 o'clock. Captain Finn stiffened at the unsolicited critique, but Kale simply turned in his saddle and studied the formation, then the forest break she'd indicated. After a long moment, he gestured to one of his officers. "Adjust outrider distance to 200 yards. Put another squad at rear left to cover that approach." The officer saluted and rode off to implement the changes. Kyle looked back at Elara with an expression that might have been respect. "You think like a commander. I was trained by one." Castle Nightshade rose from the landscape like a blade thrust into stone. 3 towers of black granite, walls thick enough to withstand siege engines, gates reinforced with iron that gleamed dully in the fading light. This was a fortress built by people who expected to be attacked, who had learned through generations of conflict that survival required both strength and strategic positioning. The courtyard inside bustled with controlled activity, soldiers drilling in formation, smiths working at forges, servants moving between buildings with the efficient purpose of people who knew their duties. Everything spoke of discipline, of an organization that ran like a well-maintained military machine. Elara had expected to be shown to servants' quarters, or perhaps the barracks. Instead, Morgana led her through the castle's main entrance and into its heart, through corridors lined with weapons and battle standards from conflicts stretching back centuries. They passed a training hall where young nobles practiced sword work under the watchful eye of a weapons master, a great hall being prepared for the evening meal, and finally arrived at a heavy wooden door guarded by 2 soldiers. Inside was a war room. Maps covered every wall, marked with colored pins and notations in tight military script. A massive table dominated the center of the space, its surface bearing a 3-dimensional terrain model of the Northern Territories, rendered in such detail that Elara could identify individual roads and river crossings. Weapon racks lined one wall, not ceremonial pieces, but functional combat steel that saw regular use. Kale stood at the table studying the terrain model. Captain Finn was there, along with 2 other people Elara didn't recognize. A woman perhaps 5 years older than Kyle, with the same amber eyes and similar bone structure that marked her as family, and a man in scholar's robes who was placing additional markers on the model with careful precision. They all looked up as Morgana entered with Elara following. "Mother, perhaps you should explain why you accidentally encountered professional soldiers on the exact road where Commander Blackthorn's daughter was working as caravan escort." Kale's tone was mild, but Elara heard the steel underneath. He'd figured it out, probably within minutes of arriving at the attack site. The question was what he intended to do about it. Morgana settled into a chair with the grace of someone who had never questioned her right to be comfortable, even in rooms designed for military planning. "Because I needed to see if she inherited her father's tactical genius. House Nightshade faces threats that require unconventional solutions. Conventional soldiers, no matter how well trained, can only respond to situations they've encountered before. Innovation requires different thinking." The woman Elara didn't recognize stepped forward, her amber eyes studying Elara with predatory intensity. "Lysandra Nightshade, Lord Kale's cousin and senior military strategist. You're the one who commanded the caravan guards during the attack. They needed direction. I provided it. Direction that worked. 3 disabled enemy soldiers, 1 dead, the rest forced to retreat, against professional military contractors." Lysandra moved to the terrain model and adjusted several markers. "These are Shadowfang positions along our border. 3 outposts lost in 6 months. Each attack coordinated, professional. The pattern suggests probing for weak points, testing response times." Captain Finn picked up the explanation without pause, the kind of seamless handoff that spoke to years of working together. "We've identified this problem. Supply lines. These 3 outposts are too far from our main garrison. Resupply takes 4 days minimum. Enemy can strike, accomplish their objective, and retreat before reinforcements arrive. Elara studied the model, her tactical training automatically analyzing the geography. The 3 lost outposts formed a rough triangle, each positioned to defend a different approach into Nightshade territory. Losing them didn't just represent a reduction in defensive capability. It created gaps in intelligence gathering, left blind spots where enemy forces could mass without detection. "You're defending positions," she said, the analysis coming together even as she spoke. "They're attacking logistics, classic asymmetric warfare. My father called it death by 1,000 raids." Silence fell across the war room. Kale leaned forward, his full attention focused on her now. "Go on." "You can't defend fixed positions that are beyond your effective support range. The enemy knows this. They're not trying to conquer territory. They're trying to bleed you, force you to spread forces thinner and thinner until you're vulnerable to a larger assault." Elara moved to the model, her finger tracing the terrain between the lost outposts. "The solution isn't defending the positions, it's controlling the terrain between them. Mobile patrols with pre-positioned supply caches, fast response teams that can reach any point in the defensive network within 12 hours. Make the wilderness itself your fortress." Lysandra's eyebrows rose. Captain Finn crossed his arms, his scarred face thoughtful. Morgana simply smiled, the expression of someone whose gamble had just paid off. Kael studied Elara for a long moment before speaking. "The life debt legally binds you to our house. Ancient law. My mother saved by your hand creates an obligation that must be fulfilled through service." He paused, and when he continued, his voice carried a different weight. "But I'm not interested in a servant. I'm offering you a position, tactical advisor to House Nightshade, your strategic insights in exchange for our protection and resources." It was more than Elara had expected, more than she'd allowed herself to hope for when she'd broken from the caravan's defensive line. A position in a noble house, legitimate work that paid well and offered stability. The kind of opportunity her father would have told her to take without hesitation. But she'd learned long ago that opportunities came with hidden costs. "What's the catch?" "You'll be making life and death decisions, sending men into danger based on your analysis. If you're wrong, people die. Families lose sons and fathers and brothers. Can you carry that weight?" The question hit harder than any blade. Elara thought of her father, the way he'd aged visibly after battles where his tactical decisions had resulted in casualties. The nights she'd found him staring at maps, mentally replaying engagements, searching for the choices that might have saved just one more life. Command wasn't about glory or recognition. It was about living with the consequences of your decisions. She met Kael's amber eyes without flinching. "I've been carrying it since I was 16 and led my first mercenary squad. Yes." 2 weeks later, Elara stood in the castle's training grounds watching the sun rise over the practice field. The soldiers were already assembled, 24 men in mixed armor who eyed her with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. Veterans recognized her father's name when Kael introduced her. The younger soldiers saw only a woman barely out of her 20s who claimed to be qualified to teach them tactics. Kael had made the announcement the previous evening. Elara Blackthorn would be implementing new defensive protocols, training soldiers in mobile warfare techniques, and redesigning the border patrol system. Anyone who had a problem with taking orders from a mercenary's daughter could request transfer to other duties. No questions asked, no judgment rendered. 3 soldiers had taken him up on the offer. The rest remained, though Elara could read the doubt in their body language. Captain Finn stepped forward, his scarred face impassive. "Lord Kael has authorized a field exercise. You'll be defending that mock outpost." He pointed to a wooden structure at the far end of the practice field, surrounded by earthworks and simple palisade walls. 20 soldiers under your command. Lord Kael will lead 40 attackers. Objective is to hold for 1 hour. Murmurs ran through the assembled soldiers. 40 against 20. Standard doctrine would be to man the walls, concentrate defensive fire, make the attackers pay for every yard of ground. It was what every military manual recommended. It was also exactly what Kael would expect. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Never fight the battle your enemy wants. Make them fight yours." Elara studied the terrain around the mock outpost, cataloging sight lines and cover, elevation changes, and approach routes. The outpost sat in a slight depression, which was tactically terrible for defense, but perfect for what she had in mind. "We're not defending from the walls," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled soldiers. 5 men will hold visible positions to create the impression of a normal defense. The other 15 will divide into 3 groups and position themselves here, here, and here. She indicated positions outside the outpost's perimeter, using terrain features for concealment. The veterans among the soldiers began to understand. One of the younger men spoke up, his voice skeptical. "That's suicide. We need every man on those walls. You're thinking like defenders. Start thinking like hunters." The exercise began at noon. Kael's force approached from the north in standard assault formation, shields overlapping, moving with the coordinated precision of well-trained soldiers. They executed a probing attack first, testing the outpost's response, pulling back when they met resistance from the 5 defenders on the walls. Elara watched from a concealed position, tracking the assault force's movements, waiting. Her father had taught her patience, the ability to let a plan unfold without rushing, without second-guessing. Trust the preparation. Trust the soldiers. Trust that the enemy will do exactly what their training tells them to do. Kael's second probe came from the east, a feint designed to draw defenders away from the real assault point. Elara signaled her hidden forces to hold position. Several of the younger soldiers looked anxious, convinced they should be reinforcing the walls. The veterans held steady, understanding now what she was building. The main assault came from the south, all 40 of Kael's soldiers committing fully to a coordinated breach attempt. They hit the wall with ladders and grappling hooks, overwhelming the 5 defenders through sheer numbers. Within minutes, they'd breached the palisade and were flooding into the outpost, victory seemingly assured. That's when Elara sprung the trap. Her 3 hidden forces attacked simultaneously from different directions, catching Kael's soldiers while they were climbing walls, fighting with shields lowered, completely committed to the breach with no reserve to counter a flanking attack. The careful discipline of their assault formation dissolved into chaos as they found themselves suddenly surrounded inside the objective they'd just captured. Kael, recognizing the tactical situation instantly, called the exercise to a halt. His soldiers lowered their weapons, many of them looking around in confusion at how rapidly their victory had transformed into encirclement. Captain Finn, who had been observing from a distance, approached with an expression that might have been respect. By all the gods, she surrendered the position to trap him. Morgana, standing beside him, smiled, just like her father at Greymore Ridge. Kael disarmed and walked to where Elara was reorganizing her scattered forces, checking that no one had been injured during the fighting. He waited until she finished before speaking. "Where did you learn that?" "Father called it the Venus trap. Let your enemy think he's winning until it's too late to escape the jaws. Your father used that tactic against Valdorian heavy cavalry. It worked then, too." "You were there." "It wasn't a question." Kael nodded slowly. "I was 19, commanded the reserve. Your father's tactics saved 300 men that day, including me." Something shifted in the air between them, an acknowledgement that transcended rank and station. 2 people who understood what it meant to study warfare, not as abstract theory, but as the difference between living and dying. Mutual respect built on shared experience, even if that experience came from different perspectives. "I'm not training you," Kael said finally, his voice carrying across the practice field so all the assembled soldiers could hear. "You're training my men. Starting tomorrow, you're our chief tactical officer." The soldiers who had doubted her looked at each other, then back at the mock outpost where their alpha had just been outmaneuvered by someone who'd seen the battlefield not as it appeared, but as it could become. Respect was earned, not given. Elara had just earned it. The following weeks passed in intensive work. Elara implemented mobile defense systems, established supply caches, trained rapid response teams. The border that had been bleeding from constant raids became a fortress without walls, defended by forces that could reach any threatened point within hours rather than days. Shadowfang raids stopped. 20 days without a single incursion, the longest peace the border had seen in 5 years. But Elara's tactical instincts told her this wasn't victory. It was the quiet before something larger. The attack came on the 21st day. Elara was in the war room when signal fires lit up the night sky. Not a single fire indicating a probe or small raid. Multiple fires across a front 20 miles wide, each representing a different attack point, each demanding immediate response. Within minutes, the war room filled with people. Kael arrived, still buckling his armor. Lysandra came from the opposite direction with maps already unrolled. Captain Finn appeared with scout reports that were still being written. 800 soldiers, Shadowfang's entire available military force, supported by siege equipment and supply wagons. This wasn't a raid. It was an invasion, coordinated and comprehensive, hitting 3 separate locations simultaneously. Captain Finn spread the reports across the war room table, his scarred face grim. They have our patrol schedules. Someone's feeding them intelligence. The implication hung in the air like poison. A spy inside House Nightshade, someone with access to sensitive military information. But there wasn't time for counterintelligence work. The enemy was moving now. Elara studied the map, seeing not the 3 attack points, but the pattern they created, a triangle with Castle Nightshade at its center. "This isn't about taking ground," she said. "Look at the geometry. These 3 points form a perimeter around the castle. They're not invading, they're isolating us." Kale leaned over the map, his amber eyes tracking the lines she was indicating. "Siege? Worse. They cut us off, then negotiate from a position of strength. Classic power play." Lysandra crossed her arms, her expression troubled. "How do we respond? If we try to defend all 3 points, we spread our forces too thin." "We don't defend all 3 points." Elara placed her hand on the map, covering 2 of the attack locations. "We abandon these 2 positions, evacuate the civilians, pull back our soldiers. Let Shadowfang capture empty outposts. Meanwhile, we concentrate all available forces here." Her finger moved to the northern attack point. Their supply line, 800 men committed deep into hostile terrain, means a long, vulnerable logistics train. We don't fight their invasion, we cut its throat. Captain Finn's hand went to his sword hilt, an instinctive gesture of protest. "It's high risk. If we're wrong, we lose everything. If we play it safe, we lose slowly. This way we decide the outcome." Kale held her gaze for a long moment, and Elara understood that this was the real test. Not the field exercise with wooden weapons. Not the patrol reforms. This was a commander's burden, the moment where theory became reality, and decisions carried consequences measured in lives. "We do it," Kale said. "Captain Finn, evacuation orders for the southern and western positions. Lysandra, coordinate the troop concentration. Elara, you're commanding the strike force." "Understood." The night raid on Shadowfang's supply depot required precision and speed. 200 cavalry, 40 miles in darkness, hitting at dawn before the enemy could respond. Elara led them through terrain that wanted to announce their presence, each step requiring attention, each breath controlled. They reached the depot 30 minutes before dawn. The timing was crucial. Too early and guards would still be alert. Too late and morning activity would make infiltration impossible. Elara split her force. 100 cavalry created a diversion from the east, drawing guards' attention. The other 100, led by Elara, infiltrated from the west during that distraction and conducted systematic destruction of supplies. Fires spreading through wagons, storage tents collapsing, water barrels poisoned. They had 15 minutes before Shadowfang's main force would respond. They made it 12 minutes before the trap closed. Reinforcements arrived faster than expected. 400 soldiers with coordinated response that showed tactical sophistication. Elara's 100 cavalry found themselves facing opposition 4 times their number, escape route cut off. The terrain offered one option, a narrow canyon pass that led northeast back toward Nightshade territory. It was either incredibly lucky or incredibly dangerous. "Into the canyon! Form shield wall!" Her soldiers responded instantly, forming defensive lines in the narrow space between canyon walls. 50 men across could hold against 400 if terrain forced the enemy to attack in limited numbers. The position would hold, but only until exhaustion or enemy patience won. Which meant Kale's relief force had to arrive in time. The battle tested every skill her father had taught her: defensive positioning, managing soldier rotation, reading enemy tactics, maintaining morale when exhaustion threatened discipline. But something else was happening. Her senses sharpened. She could hear enemy officers shouting from 100 yards away, could smell which soldiers were afraid versus confident, could see in the dark shadows as clearly as daylight. Movement speed increased. She parried strikes she shouldn't have been able to see coming. The soldier fighting beside her paused mid-strike. "Captain, your eyes." Elara caught her reflection in a polished shield. Her brown eyes now held flecks of gold swirling like liquid metal, glowing faintly in the shadowed canyon. Something was awakening, but there was no time to process it. The battle demanded her full attention, and the men under her command needed her focused on keeping them alive. She fought with enhanced awareness, each movement optimized. Not superhuman strength, but perfect tactics at supernatural speed. Her father's training amplified by something genetic she hadn't known she possessed. The enemy began to falter. This 50 held a position that should have been impossible. Shadowfang soldiers started pulling back, waiting for their commanders to reassess. That's when Kael's relief force arrived. 500 cavalry hit the Shadowfang rear ranks, turning organized assault into desperate defense. The enemy position collapsed within minutes. Kael rode through the chaos directly to the canyon. He dismounted and strode toward her, his amber eyes catching on the gold in her gaze. Understanding flickered across his features, followed by something more complex: recognition. Impossible. No one could have held that position. We held it. Kael leaned closer, his voice pitched for her ears only. What are you? Elara met his gaze, her gold-flecked eyes steady. I don't know, but whatever I am, I just saved 300 lives with strategy and 50 more with something I don't understand. Morgana approached from where she'd been coordinating the relief force. Her face showed no surprise at Elara's changed eyes, only satisfaction. The return to Castle Nightshade took place in silence. Elara rode surrounded by soldiers who treated her with new wariness, as if she'd become something that required careful handling. Only when they reached the castle, when soldiers had been dismissed and weapons stored, did Morgana lead Elara to a private solar. Kael followed, and Captain Finn and Lysandra, whose expression held complicated emotions. Elara remained standing, too wired from combat and revelation to rest. The pieces had been assembling themselves during the ride back. Her enhanced abilities, Morgana's lack of surprise, the way certain people had reacted to her father's name with recognition that went beyond professional reputation. She spoke before Morgana could begin whatever explanation had been prepared. My father was more than a mercenary commander. He was werewolf nobility, and you've known all along. Morgana's expression shifted to something approaching approval at Elara's directness. Yes, and now it's time you learned everything. Morgana's solar was lit by late afternoon sun streaming through tall windows. The room held the accumulated history of House Nightshade, ancient texts and battle maps that chronicled 3 centuries of military strategy. But Elara's attention focused entirely on the woman who had orchestrated her recruitment from the moment she'd stepped onto that forest road. You knew what I was before I did, Elara said, her voice carrying the controlled calm of someone assembling a tactical picture from incomplete intelligence. The forest attack. Those weren't random bandits. The cuts on your dress were made from the inside out. You tore your own clothes before the ambush. You were testing me. Morgana's smile held genuine respect. Most people would have missed that detail. Your father trained you well. Yes, I orchestrated the test. House Nightshade needed someone with both tactical genius and the character to use that genius honorably. Your father was the finest military mind of his generation. I needed to know if you'd inherited more than just his skills. Kael stood by the window, his amber eyes tracking between his mother and Elara. What exactly did father inherit, and why did he hide it his entire life? Morgana moved to a cabinet and withdrew a leather-bound tome that looked centuries old. She opened it to pages marked with careful annotations, genealogical charts that traced bloodlines through generations. 30 years ago, the Continental Purges eliminated werewolf noble houses that human kingdoms viewed as threats to their power. House Silvermane ruled the Eastern Kingdoms, renowned for military genius that made them nearly invincible in warfare. They weren't defeated in battle. They were betrayed during peace negotiations by allied houses who feared their growing influence. She traced lines on the genealogical chart, showing how House Silvermane's family tree had been systematically cut down. 200 Silvermane nobles executed in a single night. 50 escaped. Your father, Marcus Silvermane, was among them. He fled west, changed his name to Blackthorn, suppressed his werewolf nature through discipline and determination, became a mercenary because it was the one profession where past didn't matter, only results. Elara absorbed the information with the same analytical process she applied to battlefield intelligence. Her father's intensity, his insistence on control and discipline, the way he'd pushed her harder than seemed necessary. All of it made sense now. Why didn't he tell me? Because he wanted you to earn respect through skill, not bloodline. Wanted you to be valued for capability rather than becoming a political pawn. And he feared that if anyone discovered what you were, you'd be hunted just as his family had been. Lysandra spoke for the first time, her voice carefully measured. "The Shadow Fang attack on the supply depot wasn't random. Lord Ragnar knew you'd be leading the strike force. Someone told him a Silvermane heir had joined House Nightshade's tactical staff. They set a trap specifically for you." The pieces clicked into place with terrible clarity. The intelligence leak wasn't about routine military information. It was targeted at her specifically. Someone inside this castle had been feeding Shadowfang details about her movements. Before anyone could pursue that line of questioning, Lysandra continued, her words carrying weight that made the air in the solar grow heavy. "Someone like me." Elara's hand moved toward her sword hilt on pure instinct, years of mercenary training responding to declared threats. But Kael stepped between them, his amber eyes locked on his cousin. "Explain, now, before I forget we're family." Lysandra's voice remained steady despite the obvious tension. "My mother was Shadowfang nobility before she married into House Nightshade. I've been feeding intelligence to Lord Ragnar for 2 years. Patrol schedules, supply depot vulnerabilities, the fact that a Silvermane heir had joined your tactical staff, all of it." Kael's hand rested on his sword hilt, knuckles white with controlled fury. "Why?" "My younger brother Thomas is hostage in Shadowfang territory. Has been for 3 years. Ragnar threatened to kill him if I didn't cooperate. I've been trying to gather evidence, find proof, anything that would let me expose him without signing my brother's death warrant." She turned to face Elara directly, meeting her gold-flecked gaze without flinching. "Then I watched you hold that canyon with 50 men against 400. You're the first person I've seen who might be capable of rescuing him instead of just negotiating for his return. So I'm offering you complete intelligence on Shadowfang defenses, troop positions, guard rotations, everything you need to infiltrate Castle Bloodmoon and extract my brother, in exchange for the treason that got your people killed." The solar fell into tense silence. Elara found herself analyzing the situation as if it were a battlefield problem rather than personal betrayal. Lysandra's confession before being discovered suggested genuine remorse. The offer of intelligence created tactical opportunity, and rescuing the hostage would eliminate Ragnar's leverage while humiliating him politically. "Give me the intelligence," Elara said finally. "I'll bring your brother home, but after that, you work off this debt for the rest of your life. The soldiers who died because of your information deserve that much." Lysandra's expression showed relief mixed with acceptance of just consequences. "Agreed." The war room transformed into mission planning center over the following 3 days. Lysandra provided detailed intelligence accumulated over years of forced cooperation. Castle layouts, guard rotations, supply schedules, secret passages, the kind of comprehensive information that could only come from someone with extended access. Elara studied the materials with the intensity her father had taught her, looking for patterns and vulnerabilities that could be exploited. Castle Bloodmoon sat where river met cliff in a defensive position that had withstood 3 major sieges. Thick walls, limited approaches, natural barriers that made conventional assault impossible. Which was why she had no intention of attempting conventional assault. Kael stood at the main table studying architectural diagrams. "The water gate is your entry point, but it's defended by iron bars extending into the riverbed, specifically designed to prevent the infiltration you're planning. Lysandra's intelligence indicates 1 bar has rusted base, can be removed with time and proper leverage. Time you'll have in limited supply while submerged in darkness beneath a castle full of enemies, which is why they won't expect it." Elara selected her team based on specific technical skills rather than raw combat capability. 12 operators, including Captain Finn, each chosen for capabilities that normal warfare didn't require. Marcus for demolitions expertise, Raven for infiltration skills, Wolf for tracking abilities, veterans who could execute under pressure without requiring extensive supervision. The planning consumed every waking hour, every phase examined, every assumption challenged, every failure point identified and contingencies developed. This was the work that separated successful operations from catastrophic failures. Kael called halt when exhaustion began affecting judgment, but before others could depart, he gestured for Elara to remain. They stood alone in the war room, surrounded by maps and diagrams, documenting a plan that would either succeed brilliantly or fail catastrophically. "I'm going with you." The words carried no room for argument, which was why Elara had to argue anyway. "No, that wasn't a request. And this isn't about rank. You're an Alpha Lord. If you're captured, Ragnar has leverage against King Aldwin. You're too valuable to risk. I'm expendable." Kael's hand moved with supernatural speed, catching her wrist before she could pull away. Not threatening, not violent, but absolutely insistent. The contact created sensation like static electricity, the mate bond they'd formed during an earlier ceremony flaring to sudden awareness. "You are not expendable to me." The intensity in his amber eyes went beyond tactical concern. This was personal. The bond carried emotions she could feel as if they were her own. Protectiveness, fear, something deeper that neither had acknowledged, because acknowledging would complicate the professional relationship they'd built. "Then trust me to do what I'm trained for," Elara said quietly. "You command the strategic picture. I execute the tactical mission. That's how this partnership works." The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken arguments and concerns that couldn't be voiced without undermining their working relationship. Finally, Kael released her wrist and stepped back, pressing something into her hand. His personal seal ring, symbol that carried his authority throughout the Northern Territories. "If things go wrong, this gets you an audience with King Aldwin. Tell him everything. I'll bring them all home." 2 nights later, Elara stood in forest darkness overlooking Castle Bloodmoon. Behind her, 11 soldiers waited in absolute silence, each carrying specialized equipment and wearing blackened leather that wouldn't reflect moonlight. No moon tonight, no stars visible through cloud cover. Perfect conditions. The infiltration proceeded exactly as planned until it didn't. The underwater approach through the water gate, the rusted bar that came free after 10 minutes of patient work, the team squeezing through one at a time into the castle's lower storage area, movement through servant passages using Lysandra's intelligence, the kitchen crossing disguised as servants, the tower approach timed to guard rotation changes. But the intelligence had been incomplete. One guard remained at Thomas's cell when their information said the position would be empty. Elara made the decision in a heartbeat. Alert him and the entire castle mobilizes. Continue and 1 man dies to save 12. The stealth kill was clean and necessary. The lockpicking took 3 minutes while footsteps approached from below. They extracted Thomas just as patrol passed their position, seconds away from discovery. The escape went wrong when alarm bells began ringing. Someone had found the dead guard, or noticed irregularities, or simply gotten lucky. Castle Bloodmoon awakened with 200 soldiers mobilizing to secure the breach. Elara's team was trapped on the castle's 3rd level with no clear route to the water gate. "Up we go up!" They climbed to the roof, Marcus rigging smoke bombs at stairwell entrances to buy time. Shadowfang soldiers filled the courtyard below, blocking all ground exits. The tactical situation was degrading by the second. Then hoofbeats thundered through the courtyard, not Shadowfang reinforcements. These riders wore black armor with silver trim. Nightshade cavalry. 50 riders led by Kael himself, who'd followed despite explicit orders to remain behind. His voice carried across the courtyard with command presence that made even enemy soldiers hesitate. "Elara, the southern approach is open for 30 seconds. 30 seconds. They used ropes to rappel down the exterior wall, Thomas secured to Raven's harness. Hit the courtyard running. Reached Kael's cavalry formation just as Shadowfang forces closed from 3 sides. The fighting retreat from Castle Bloodmoon became running battle across 15 miles of broken terrain, 50 Nightshade cavalry protecting 12 infiltrators and 1 prisoner, pursued by 100 enemy riders through forest and ravine. Elara rode beside Kael, their horses matching pace, awareness of each other's position absolute through the mate bond. She could feel his tactical thinking, sense when he was about to execute maneuvers, adjust her own responses before he issued commands. They were fighting as one organism, 2 minds with single purpose. The bond her father had denied himself, the connection that made werewolf military units devastatingly effective. 3 miles ahead was terrain she recognized, a narrow defile where road passed between rocky ridges, limited space where numbers wouldn't matter. Through the bond, Kael understood her thinking the moment it formed. His hand signals adjusted the cavalry course, angling toward the defile at speed that looked like desperation, but was calculated approach to chosen battlefield. They reached the defile with minutes to spare. Kael positioned 20 cavalry at the narrow entrance in defensive formation, while the rest continued through with Thomas and the infiltration team. Elara should have continued with the escaping group. She was the tactical mind. Basic military logic said high-value assets didn't take unnecessary risks. She wheeled her horse and rode back toward the defensive position. Kale saw her coming and didn't waste breath on arguments they'd already had. She was committed. They would hold together or die together. The bond made that decision inevitable. Shadowfang cavalry hit the defensive line with fury, 100 riders funneling into space wide enough for 5 abreast, all their numerical advantage negated by geography favoring defenders. The fighting was brutal and efficient. Nightshade soldiers held formation, supporting each other, rotating fresh fighters forward as exhaustion took toll. Shadowfang soldiers pressed the attack with desperate fury, recognizing that every minute of delay let their targets escape further. But during that combat, something shifted in Elara at fundamental level. The stress of prolonged fighting, the threat to people she'd come to care about, the genetic triggers inherited from her father. All of it combined to push her past the partial awakening she'd experienced in the canyon. Her awareness expanded beyond anything she'd felt before. Not just enhanced senses, but tactical precognition. She could read enemy movements before they happened, could see battlefield like three-dimensional chessboard where every possible move was visible simultaneously. A Shadowfang soldier lunged at her with spear thrusts that should have been impossible to dodge. She wasn't looking at him, but she knew the strike was coming, the angle it would take, the exact moment to move. She twisted aside with movement that seemed to predict rather than react, grabbed a fallen spear and threw it 50 yards to kill a rider who'd been moving to flank Kale. An impossible shot made casually, effortlessly, moved between 2 charging horses with timing so precise she seemed to phase through space. Hamstrung both animals with economy of motion that wasted nothing. Kale, fighting beside her, witnessed the transformation with something approaching awe. This wasn't just enhanced reflexes. This was tactical genius operating at supernatural level. Every move optimal, 0 wasted effort. Her father's training combining with Silvermane genetics to create something unprecedented. After 30 minutes of sustained assault, Shadowfang forces retreated. Not routed, but withdrawn in recognition that the position couldn't be taken at acceptable cost. Lord Ragnar, watching from a distance, called off the attack with visible frustration. His shout carried across the defile. "This isn't finished, Silvermane! Your bloodline was exterminated for good reason!" The return journey took 2 days. Thomas needed rest. Wounded required care. Horses couldn't sustain combat pace indefinitely. They moved carefully through territory where enemy patrols might still be hunting. On the second evening, Elara found moment alone with Thomas. The boy sat by campfire looking younger than 16, processing freedom after 3 years of captivity. "My sister talked about you," Thomas said quietly. "She said you were like your father, that you saw battles no one else could see. Your sister gave us the intelligence that made the rescue possible. She's the reason you're free. She traded information that got people killed. For me." The guilt in his voice was expected. He'd had 3 years to shoulder blame that wasn't his to carry. "She made choices in impossible situation. So did we. So did every soldier who fought to get you out. Now we all live with those choices and try to be worthy of what they cost." The next morning, they reached Castle Nightshade to find King Aldwin's royal guards waiting with official summons. The matter of a Silvermane heir could no longer be handled quietly. Continental politics demanded royal attention. The throne room at this capital was designed to make visitors feel small. Vaulted ceilings, marble columns. The throne elevated so anyone approaching had to look up at royal authority made manifest. Elara stood before that throne with Kyle beside her, aware that the next hour would determine whether she was valuable asset or dangerous threat. 200 nobles filled the chamber, political theater designed to demonstrate that whatever judgment came would have collective authority. King Aldwin sat flanked by Queen Celestia and senior advisors. His expression gave no indication of predetermined outcome. Lord Davros Ironclaw stood at petitioner's position, armor polished, bearing radiating confidence of someone who believed he held winning arguments. "Your Majesty, this tribunal concerns continental security. House Nightshade harbors a Silvermane heir, a bloodline exterminated 30 years ago for attempting to establish werewolf military dominance. Allowing that bloodline to resurface threatens the balance of power that has maintained peace for 3 decades. Murmurs rippled through assembled nobles. Davros pressed his advantage. The Silvermane used military genius to conquer. They sought to establish empire ruled by werewolf nobility with human kingdoms reduced to tributary states. What prevents history from repeating if we allow this heir to develop abilities unchecked? It was well argued, touching on legitimate fears. Elara recognized quality persuasion. Kael presented counter-arguments. Your Majesty, Lord Davros asks you to eliminate someone whose crimes consist of being born to wrong parents. Lady Elara has broken Shadowfang's invasion, rescued a noble hostage under impossible conditions, demonstrated tactical genius that serves the crown rather than threatens it. Queen Celestia spoke, her voice carrying musical quality that reminded everyone of her supernatural nature. The concern is not Lady Elara's current actions but her potential. Silvermane bloodlines were eliminated because they could not be controlled. What prevents that same uncontrollable nature from emerging? Elara stepped forward without waiting for permission. Your Majesty, may I address the court? King Aldwin studied her before nodding permission. Lords and ladies, you fear what I might become. Let me tell you what I have been. She let her gaze sweep across assembled nobility, making eye contact with enough individuals that they felt personally addressed. My father, Marcus Silvermane, chose to suppress his nature, not from weakness, but from honor. He could have revealed himself, rallied surviving werewolf houses, sought revenge for the purges that murdered his family. Instead, he became a mercenary, served human kingdoms, saved thousands of lives including Lord Kael's, chose order over chaos. She paused, letting words settle. I was raised on one principle: choose who you serve, but choose with honor. I choose to serve the crown, not because I'm bound by life debt, not because I fear execution, but because I believe in civilization, in the idea that we're stronger together than divided. That strategy serves justice better than savagery. Another pause. The chamber had gone completely silent. You want to know what prevents history from repeating? I do. Every day I choose order over chaos, strategy over slaughter, building over destroying. Execute me if you must, but know you're killing someone who could defend this kingdom instead of threatening it. King Aldwin leaned back, expression still carefully neutral. Lord Davros argues for elimination of potential threat. Lord Kael argues for recognition of proven asset. Both positions have merit. Therefore, we establish new position that addresses both concerns. The king's gaze fixed on Elara. We create the office of Royal Strategist, a tactical advisor who serves the crown directly with authority to coordinate continental defense during crisis situations. This position is offered to Lady Elara. If she accepts, her Silvermane heritage becomes asset to the crown rather than threat. Stunned silence, then murmurs building toward chaos before the king raised one hand. Lady Elara, will you serve? It was test and opportunity combined. Accept and she became part of establishment. Refuse and she proved warnings about uncontrollable nature. On one condition, Your Majesty. Gasps from nobles. No one conditioned the crown's offers. Kael's hand moved to his sword, ready to defend her if guards interpreted this as offense. King Aldwin's eyebrows rose, but he gestured for her to continue. I need autonomy. Strategy by committee doesn't work. Give me authority to command across territorial lines during continental threats. Otherwise, I'm decorative advisor with no ability to execute actual defense. The king studied her for what felt like compressed hours. Granted, you are now royal strategist with continental authority during crisis situations. Use it wisely or lose it along with your head. Lord Davros stepped forward, face tight with controlled anger. Your Majesty, one final concern. Lady Elara is unmated. A Silvermane with no territorial bonds. No supernatural loyalty beyond her word. What prevents allegiance from shifting when opportunity arises? Kael's voice cut across the chamber. I'll mate her. Shockwaves through assembled nobility, an alpha lord offering to bind himself to uncertain bloodline. Kael turned to Elara, amber eyes holding question that transcended political necessity. Alpha bond creates supernatural loyalty. If Lord Davros questions Lady Elara's word, let him question the mate bond's power. Through their existing bond, Elara felt his emotions. Not obligation, not political calculation. Something more complex that included respect and attraction and recognition, that they functioned better together. She met his gaze and nodded once. King Aldwin's voice carried satisfaction. Then it is settled. The royal strategist will mate with Lord Kael. Ceremony in 3 days. The mate bond ceremony was nothing like human weddings. No flowers or elaborate celebration. The ritual took place in King's Great Hall, before witnesses who understood they were observing supernatural joining. Queen Celestia officiated as highest-ranking werewolf present. She stood before Elara and Kael with ceremonial blade used through 6 generations. Alpha bond is not marriage. It is joining. Two minds become one tactical unit. Two souls share strength. This bond cannot be broken except through death. Do you both accept this freely?" In unison, "We accept." The queen cut both their palms, blood mixing as she pressed their hands together. Blood to blood, mind to mind, strength to strength. The bond that had existed since first ceremony suddenly deepened, expanded, became something fundamental. Elara could feel Kael's mind touching hers with intimacy that transcended words, could sense his tactical thinking as if it were her own, could share awareness of battlefield conditions without verbal communication. And he could feel her analytical processes, the Silvermane tactical precognition that let her read patterns others couldn't see. The gold flecks in both their eyes blazed simultaneously, visible manifestation of bond completion. Kael's amber eyes now held traces of the same gold marking Elara's heritage. Queen Celestia withdrew. King Aldwin addressed witnesses. The royal strategist is now bound to House Nightshade through mate bond. Her loyalty is demonstrated through supernatural connection that cannot be faked or broken. Let no one question her commitment to crown service. As celebration feast began, urgent news arrived that would test everything they'd built. Captain Finn entered with expression that made experienced soldiers reach for weapons. He approached Kael and Elara directly, voice pitched low. Reports from eastern borders, multiple kingdoms mobilizing. Valdoria, Prussia, Austria. Total force estimate exceeds 80,000 soldiers. They're calling it response to cooperative contagion. Coalition forming to eliminate alliance model before it spreads. Intelligence suggests they'll be at our borders within 3 weeks. Maybe 4 if weather delays their march. Elara felt ice spreading through veins. The success of their defensive innovations had created existential threat to traditional power structures. Old kingdoms saw cooperation as disease to be contained or destroyed. Through the mate bond, Kael's thoughts matched her analysis. This was the test that would prove whether everything they'd built could survive combined opposition of continental powers. 3 weeks, Elara said quietly, her tactical mind already processing the timeline. That gives us exactly enough time to prepare a defense that 80,000 soldiers won't be expecting. Kael's hand found hers beneath the table, their bond pulsing with shared determination. Then we have work to do. The celebration continued around them, oblivious nobles toasting the new marriage while beyond their borders, the largest military force assembled in a generation prepared to march. The fairy tale had its romantic moment. Now came the part where romance had to survive reality, and Elara intended to make sure it did. 3 weeks after the bonding ceremony, the war room at Castle Nightshade had transformed into a continental command center. Coalition forces had reached alliance borders, and the war Elara had been preparing for had finally begun. Maps covered every wall now, extending far beyond northern territories to encompass the entire eastern approach where enemy forces massed. Intelligence reports arrived hourly from scouts, merchants, travelers. The picture they painted was grimmer than initial estimates. 85,000 soldiers under unified command. Valdoria provided 20,000 heavy infantry. Prussia contributed 15,000 cavalry. Austria sent 20,000 mixed forces with exceptional artillery. Smaller kingdoms filled gaps with specialized units that turned this from large army into comprehensive military machine, all marching toward alliance territories with stated objective of eliminating cooperative governance before it could spread. Elara stood at the central table studying terrain models Captain Finn's staff had constructed. Kael worked beside her, their mate bond allowing tactical analysis without lengthy verbal explanations. When she identified defensive positions, he immediately understood implications. When he saw supply vulnerabilities, she was already calculating exploitation methods. Queen Celestia had remained after the ceremony, bringing intelligence networks that extended throughout the continent. The reports she delivered painted clear picture of enemy intentions. Princess Seraphine commands Valdorian forces. The Queen placed marker on the map. She studied at Imperial War College, has never lost major engagement. Lysandra, tentatively accepted back into War Council after Thomas's rescue, added her intelligence. Seraphine's father believes cooperative governance represents existential threat to traditional monarchy. He's fighting to preserve social order that puts kings above subjects. The strategic situation was clear and terrible. Alliance territories could field perhaps 40,000 defenders with maximum contributions. Outnumbered better than 2 to 1 by enemy coalition holding every conventional military advantage. Standard doctrine said you negotiated when facing such odds, made concessions, survived to fight another day. But negotiation meant abandoning everything they'd built, everything that had made their territories prosperous. Elara studied the map with enhanced Silvermane awareness. Patterns emerged, lines of advance, supply dependencies, coordination requirements. The coalition was powerful, but power created vulnerabilities. Her father's voice echoed in memory. When facing overwhelming force, never fight the battle they want. We invite them in. The war room fell silent. Every eye turned toward her. Elaborate, Queen Celestia said carefully. Elara moved to the map, finger tracing coalition advance routes. They're attacking on 3 fronts. Their plan depends on us concentrating forces to defend against main thrust. Standard overwhelming strategy. But we don't defend any of them. We let them advance unopposed. Captain Finn's hand went to sword hilt. Let them take our territory without fighting? Without fighting conventional battles, yes. Every mile they advance stretches supply lines, divides their forces, moves them deeper into terrain we control. We trade space for time and tactical advantage. Kale was already seeing it through their bond. Our 17 allied territories don't defend borders, they defend themselves. Every town becomes fortress. Enemy can't leave hostile forces threatening rear areas. Exactly. They have to siege each position or leave troops behind to contain them. Classic strategic depth defense. We don't beat them through superior strength. We drown them in geography and logistics. Queen Celestia moved to the map, tactical education evident in how quickly she grasped implications. While their main armies are tied down besieging fortified positions, our mobile forces strike supply convoys, raid artillery, harass reinforcements, never give them decisive battle they want. The Silvermane strategy, Lysandra breathed. Your father used this against Valdorian cavalry at Greymore Ridge. He taught me one fundamental principle. Army's strength isn't in soldiers. It's in logistics that keep those soldiers fed, armed, and mobile. Cut logistics and army defeats itself. The planning consumed 3 days. Coordinating 17 allied territories required diplomacy and military skill. Each commander needed to understand their role, trust that temporary territorial loss wouldn't become permanent abandonment. Then unexpected allies arrived. Lord Davros Ironclaw appeared at castle gates with 5,000 soldiers and request for audience, the noble who'd argued for Elara's execution at tribunal. He entered war room without ceremony, amber eyes taking in assembled commanders. Lady Strategist, I've come to offer my forces to continental defense. Kale's hand moved toward weapon. Captain Finn shifted position. Elara studied Davros through enhanced senses, detecting lies through micro-expressions and heart rate. Tense but not hostile, concerned but not threatening, but not. Why? You argued for my execution. Because I believed Silvermane bloodline represented threat. I was wrong. Davros moved to map. Coalition isn't coming to eliminate you specifically. They're eliminating an idea. That cooperation can replace domination. If they win, traditional power structures get reinforced. Every ambitious minor noble gets crushed under aristocratic authority. Honest self-interest, more reliable than forced loyalty. What do you bring besides 5,000 soldiers? Intelligence about Valdorian tactics. I studied under same instructors as Princess Seraphine. I know how she thinks, how she'll respond. And I bring credibility with traditional houses uncertain about supporting cooperative model. Through their bond, Kael's silent communication. Accept but watch carefully. Welcome to the Alliance, Lord Davros. Your forces assigned to mobile cavalry operations. Over following weeks, additional houses joined. By the time coalition forces crossed into Alliance territory, defenders numbered 55,000. Still badly outnumbered but no longer facing impossible odds. The war began without dramatic battles. Coalition forces advanced on 3 fronts and met virtually no resistance. They captured deliberately evacuated border outposts, marched through villages whose populations had withdrawn to fortified towns, claimed territory at pace that seemed like validation of overwhelming superiority. Princess Seraphine commanded from Valdorian Column's center, confident, expecting complete victory within 6 weeks. Then they reached first fortified town and everything changed. Westfield was small farming community that under normal circumstances could be taken in single afternoon. But Westfield had spent 3 weeks preparing using every lesson cooperative governance had taught. Reinforced walls, stockpiled supplies, every resident trained in basic defense. When Valdorian forces attacked expecting token resistance, they met coordinated defense that killed 300 soldiers before dawn forced withdrawal. It took 12 days to capture Westfield. 12 days during which coalition advance completely stalled. Meanwhile, Elara's mobile forces struck first major supply convoy. 200 cavalry hit at dawn, destroying wagons, scattering guards, withdrawing before reinforcements responded. Not decisive victory, just one of 1,000 cuts bleeding coalition logistics. By week 4, the pattern was clear. Coalition had conquered 8 territories, but garrisoned 5,000 troops to hold them. Main army strength down to 80,000 from attrition. Supply situation deteriorating. Morale dropping as soldiers realized this wouldn't be quick victory promised. Princess Seraphine recognized the trap. She requested permission to withdraw, consolidate, secure supply lines. But political considerations prevented military logic. Coalition couldn't retreat without admitting failure. They were committed to strategy slowly destroying them. Week 6 brought crisis point. Coalition forces scattered across 200 miles of hostile terrain, every town requiring siege, every village demanding attention. Main armies exhausted from constant low-level combat that never offered decisive engagement. Seraphine made the only military decision possible: order full retreat toward home territories. Preserve armies for future campaigns when circumstances were more favorable. But retreating 80,000 soldiers through territory crawling with hostile forces was military nightmare. That's when Elara sprang final phase. Greyfang Pass was narrow canyon, forming only practical route for large armies moving between Alliance territory and Valdorian homeland. 2 miles long, 400 yards wide at broadest point. Steep walls limiting tactical options. Elara positioned 10,000 defenders in prepared positions throughout the pass. Earthworks, barriers, hidden archer positions, overlapping fields of fire turning canyon into kill zone. 60,000 soldiers needed to pass through to reach safety. Seraphine saw the trap immediately, but she had no choice. Any other route would take weeks and supply situation couldn't sustain that delay. She ordered attack. The battle that followed would be studied in military academies for generations. 60,000 attackers funneled into terrain, negating numerical advantage. Waves of soldiers breaking against prepared defenses. Casualties mounting with every hour. Elara commanded from elevated position, observing entire battlefield. Through Silvermane abilities, she tracked enemy movement patterns, predicted where attacks would focus, shifted defenders to meet each threat before it developed. Through Mate Bond, she coordinated with Kael leading cavalry reserves. After 8 hours, coalition forces had taken 15,000 casualties and advanced perhaps 500 yards. Mathematics were brutal. At this rate, they would lose entire army before breaking through. Princess Seraphine, recognizing military reality, did what few commanders had courage to do. She sent messenger under flag of truce requesting negotiations. Elara met Valdorian princess in neutral ground halfway through pass, surrounded by dead and dying from both sides. Seraphine was perhaps 35, carrying herself with military bearing marking career soldier. Her armor dented from personal combat, face showing exhaustion beyond physical fatigue. Your tactics are brilliant. Your father would be proud. Greyfang Pass will be studied for centuries. He taught me one thing above all: win the last battle, not the first. Seraphine gestured toward Canyon where her army was trapped. I can keep attacking, eventually break through or die trying, but military logic says I've already lost. Question is whether we both lose or find different outcome. What are you offering? Withdrawal of all coalition forces, recognition of your governing model's legitimacy, cessation of hostilities. In exchange, you let my armies withdraw intact, clean disengagement preserving our military strength. Reasonable offer dressed as defeat. But Elara saw deeper implications. Let them withdraw intact, and they'd return in 2 years with better preparation. Through Mate Bond, she felt Kael's thoughts matching hers. This was decision point determining not just this war's outcome, but entire future of cooperative governance. Counteroffer: your forces withdraw immediately, but Valdoria joins alliance as full member with equal standing. You help us refine military cooperation. We help you implement governance innovations that made our territories prosperous. Seraphine's eyes widened. Not surrender, not even victory. Something transcending traditional winner and loser framework. You're asking me to join the system I came to destroy. I'm offering you chance to lead its next evolution. Your father sent you to eliminate threat. I'm suggesting you return with bigger prize. Not just military defeat prevented, but new model making Valdoria stronger. Silence stretched while Seraphine processed implications. Around them, soldiers waited for judgment, determining whether they died here or marched home. Finally, Valdorian Princess smiled, expression mixing respect with calculation with relief. You fight like your father, but you negotiate like someone understanding politics isn't zero-sum game. I'll need to convince my father, but I think he'll find this outcome more palatable than returning with half his army dead and nothing to show. Negotiations took 3 days. Seraphine couldn't make decisions for coalition partners, but could broker discussions. One by one, coalition kingdoms agreed to terms. Austria withdrew in exchange for trade agreements. Prussia accepted governance advisors. Smaller kingdoms simply took opportunity to extricate themselves. Within 2 weeks, all coalition forces had departed alliance territory. Not in defeat, but mutual withdrawal, letting everyone claim partial victory while avoiding catastrophic loss. Victory achieved through strategy making continued fighting more costly than negotiated settlement. King Aldwin summoned Elara and Kael to capital for formal recognition. Throne room packed with nobles who doubted cooperative governance could withstand serious military challenge. The king's voice carried satisfaction. Lady Elara, Lord Kael, you've defended not just territory but an idea. Proven cooperation can defeat conquest when led by brilliant strategy. He gestured toward Queen Celestia, who stepped forward carrying document bearing royal seals. By our authority, we establish Continental Alliance Council, 17 member kingdoms with equal standing, unified military command during crises, cooperative governance as foundational principle, and we appoint Lady Elara Silvermane as Alliance Supreme Commander. The title came with enormous responsibility, commanding forces from 17 kingdoms, coordinating strategy across territories larger than most historical empires, bearing burden of decisions affecting millions. Her father had avoided exactly this authority, but he'd also taught her that duty sometimes required accepting burdens you'd rather avoid. She knelt before throne. I accept this responsibility. I will serve with honor and defend alliance with every skill my father taught me. King Aldwin placed hand on her shoulder. Your father was finest tactical mind of his generation. You've proven yourself his equal. Now prove yourself his superior by building something outlasting any single commander. The years that followed were spent implementing systematic approaches to governance and defense. Professional military academies where officers from allied kingdoms studied together. Unified communication networks. Supply systems supporting operations across hundreds of miles. Most importantly, training the next generation. Lysandra had proven herself through intelligence work preventing several coalition ambushes. More significantly, she thought strategically rather than just tactically. Could see patterns across multiple theaters, could coordinate between different national forces without triggering political conflicts. Elara spent hours teaching Lysandra everything her father had taught her, not just tactics, but strategic thinking, not just winning battles but preventing wars, comprehensive education, transforming talented officer into strategic commander capable of bearing responsibility for millions of lives. Because Elara understood what her father learned too late. Personal genius was limitation, not asset. Real strength came from creating systems not dependent on any single individual's irreplaceable abilities. 25 years after that day in Blackwood Forest, Elara stood before largest assembly in human history. Universal Declaration of Cooperative Principles was being signed in ceremony attended by representatives from every inhabited continent. What started as desperate defensive innovation had become model studied and implemented across known world. Representatives approached one by one to add signatures. Master Chen from Chinese Empire, Chief Running Bear from Western nations, Queen Amara from African Confederacy, each acknowledging alliance principles had proven worth through decades of sustained success. When signatures were complete, King Aldwin, now elderly but still commanding, addressed assembly. We have witnessed something unprecedented. Not victory of one nation over another, but victory of cooperation over conquest. Not domination of strong over weak, but elevation of all through mutual support. This is legacy of Lady Elara Silvermane, whose father taught her tactics, but whose own wisdom taught us winning battles matters less than preventing wars. After ceremony, Elara retreated to Memorial Garden, where names of those who'd died defending alliance were inscribed. So many names, so much sacrifice. Much. Kael found her there, as he always did, their bond making true separation impossible. Thinking about the cost. Always. Every decision that got someone killed. Every battle that could have been avoided. Weight never gets lighter. That's what makes you different from conquerors. They don't feel weight. You carry it and keep moving forward anyway. Movement at garden entrance. Young woman in military uniform approached with careful respect. Perhaps 20 years old. Face showing mixed heritage becoming common as Alliance territories intermingled. Supreme Commander, I'm Captain Elara Blackthorn. I'm told we're related. Distant cousin through your father's family line. Another Silvermane. Elara studied the young woman and saw familiar gold flecks in her eyes. Bloodline her father tried to hide emerging in new generation, but without fear and persecution defining previous era. Captain Blackthorn, what brings you here? I've been accepted to Advanced Strategy program at Military Academy. I wanted to meet you before classes begin, to understand what it means to carry this legacy. Elara gestured for Sarah to walk with her through garden, past names of heroes who'd built the peace this young woman inherited. It means understanding tactical genius is tool, not destiny. It means choosing every day to serve something larger than yourself. It means carrying weight of lives lost and decisions made without letting that weight crush you. The instructors say you've never lost major engagement. The instructors are wrong. I've lost plenty. What I haven't lost is sight of what matters. Battles are temporary. Systems endure. Your father's generation built tactical excellence. Mine built strategic frameworks. Yours will build something neither imagined. That's how progress works. They walked in silence, 3 generations of military leadership connected by blood and purpose. What if I'm not good enough? Then you'll fail. Learn from failure. Try again with better understanding. That's how everyone gets good enough, including me, including your father, including every name on these walls. Kael joined them, completing picture of past and present and future standing together. Eastern ambassadors asking when you'll retire. Want to know who'll succeed you? Elara glanced at Sarah, seeing potential training could develop. Tell them I'm already training my replacement. 5 more years. But they're getting someone understanding preventing wars matters more than winning them. Young Captain's eyes widened with understanding and terror and excitement that came with accepting responsibility larger than personal ambition. That night, reviewing reports from across Alliance, Elara and Kael sat in quarters that had become home over decades of service. We did it, Kael said quietly, hand finding hers. Built something that works, that lasts. We started it. Every generation will have to rebuild in new contexts. Nothing's permanent. But if we've taught them how to think strategically about cooperation, maybe it survives us. Through window, stars painted patterns across sky, covering territories where peace was maintained, not through overwhelming force, but through mutual benefit and shared prosperity. Choose who you serve, but choose with honor. She'd chosen, had served, had built something worthy of legacy she inherited, and blood flowing through her veins. Silvermane tactical genius that once threatened to conquer, now defended civilization against those who would tear it apart. Elara Silvermane, Supreme Commander of Continental Alliance, daughter of Marcus who had been Marcus Silvermane, closed her eyes and felt weight of responsibility settle like familiar armor. Tomorrow would bring new problems, new threats, new opportunities to prove cooperation could triumph over conquest, that strategic thinking could prevent wars better than winning them, that love of something larger than yourself could motivate sacrifice, individualistic ambition never could. But tonight, she rested, beside mate who'd stood with her through every battle. In home they'd defended, surrounded by peace they'd built through blood and sacrifice, and stubborn refusal to accept warfare as humanity's inevitable destiny. Victory wasn't about defeating enemies. Victory was creating a world where former enemies became allies, where strength came from cooperation rather than domination, where next generation inherited peace instead of war. That was legacy worth building. That was crown of cooperation outlasting any individual commander's brilliance. And as sleep claimed her, Elara's last thought was gratitude. For father who'd trained her, for mate who'd fought beside her, for allies who'd believed cooperation was possible, for everyone whose names were inscribed on memorial walls because they'd chosen to serve something greater than themselves. Silvermane legacy lived, not in conquest, not in domination, but in systematic application of tactical genius to greatest challenge humanity faced, building peace that would outlast them all.